Hello, inmates, and welcome to week 7 of the cellblock Scorch. This is Bones, and I'm recording as the winner of this week's Scorch. This week's prompt was given by Peishi, and it was the appearance of an imaginary friend wreaks havoc on a college student's life. This one is standalone, so you don't have to know anything before we get into it, so here we go. The title of this Scorch is CBD, or Cute but dangerous. Xander smiled as he got back to his dorm. It was nearly 3 in the morning now, but he'd been having an amazing time hanging out with his friends and the girl he liked since 10 the day before. Forget the homework he'd put off and the sleep he'd sacrificed. Xander was on cloud 9 right now and was sure nothing could bring him down. Opening the door to his actual room, determined to get some sleep, his lowest grade was only a C right now, so it wasn't like he couldn't afford it, he stopped short in shock. There, jumping on his bed, was a little blonde girl. Her impossibly long hair was put up in pigtails, which dropped and rose when she did, almost in a way that seemed to defy gravity every few seconds. But other than that, she wore simple jeans and a t-shirt, and no shoes. She looked almost familiar for some reason, but Xander was too baffled to pinpoint where she could possibly be from. Who the... what... how... he started out, really not sure how to handle a small child suddenly appearing in his bedroom. She let out an excited squeal and whipped around, and he got only a glimpse of her technicolor eyes before she leaped at him and caught him in a tackling hug that sent him stumbling backwards. She yelled something when she leaped, but he was so in shock that it took a minute to process. And when he did, he was brought to the floor in shock. "Princess Sparkle Pony, I'm so glad you're back!" the girl had beamed, and Xander felt himself wither a little inside. Princess Sparkle Pony. That had not been a fabulous part of his life. Or rather, it had been. One filled with pink glitter and pretending to woo all of the princesses in the world and strutting around in his mom's high heels. Oh, it had been fabulous, all right. He'd just hoped it would nicely stay in the little corner of his mind that he'd shoved it into and never surface again. He'd nearly forgotten about it. That, and the little imaginary friend he'd had that had looked suspiciously like this girl. Great. Awesome. I've had a psychotic break. Xander sighed, slumping back and staring up at the ceiling. "Are you okay, Sparkle? You don't look like you're having fun," the girl asked, her face sliding into Xander's view of the ceiling. She was frowning, looking utterly adorable and impossibly concerned for his health. Xander groaned and shut his eyes, refusing to let a figment of his own imagination dupe him into something. "Whoa, Xan, you all right? I thought I heard you talking, but what are you doing on the floor?" Xander bolted up at the voice of his roommate, but since the girl was leaning over him, he simply smashed their heads together. "Ouch! Watch where you're going," he hissed, having fallen back to the floor, clutching his head. The girl looked largely unaffected. "Dude, do you need help? Are you drunk or something?" No, I'm fine. I just need some sleep," Xander replied, not moving from his spot on the floor. There was silence for a moment, and then, "So are you going to your bed, or should I just try not to kick you later?" The groan Xan let out next was the loudest yet. Hey, Sparkle, why are you ignoring me?" Xander kept his jaw clenched and his eyes down, hands grasping onto his backpack straps like a lifeline as he tried to ignore the extra weight on his shoulders. How had the little brat even got up there? He had said no to the piggyback ride and refused to let her up on his shoulders, and then halfway to his first class, he'd realized she was up there anyway. He thanked his lucky stars that no one else could see her, though, because otherwise this whole thing would be even more awkward than it already was. A sharp yank on his hair drew him out of his thoughts with a yelp, and it had a few passers-by staring. He tried to send them reassuring grins before attempting to crane his neck in a way that allowed him to see the girl. "It is not nice to yank on hair, kid. Don't do it. And I told you not to call me Sparkle." He hadn't managed to get her face in view, but he heard her start to sniffle. "Oh, geez, please don't cry," he pled, now frantically trying to get her face in view and not noticing the people around him staring at his erratic movements and the fact that he was talking to no one. I can't help it, the girl sniffled. You don't remember me, do you? What? Of course I do. We used to play all the time. But you don't even know my name, she wailed, flopping over onto his head in despair. He couldn't counter that. He didn't remember her name at all. Cassiopeia, Pinky, Audrey, Gonzalez. The wails got louder with each guess, and he almost missed the hour bell because of it. Jeez, now I'm late. Please be quiet, he snapped, running into his classroom. Math was difficult to focus on when there was a wailing child in the room, especially when he knew he was the reason she was crying, and when literally no one else could hear her. So when he kept asking the person next to him what the teacher was saying because it was too loud to hear, he got strange looks. On the bright side, she had dismounted from his shoulders, but he couldn't decide if that was preferable to what she was doing now. She had traveled sadly around the room, leaning on his other classmates and trying to gain their sympathy. It was honestly heartbreaking because not a single one of them acknowledged her, and after she realized they wouldn't, she had crawled sadly under the teacher's chair and proceeded to sob. Basically, Xander was feeling like a pretty terrible person about now. By the time the class ended, she had quieted down to muffled sniffles. Xander took as long as possible packing up his belongings, waving off his friends who tried to talk to him, hoping that the room would clear out so he could talk to the invisible girl curled under the teacher's chair without looking like a crazy person. The room did clear, of all but the teacher, who was sitting at his desk, on the chair that the blonde was hiding beneath. Of course. Xander, gathering his courage, began to walk out of the classroom. Right before he had passed the chair, however, he let out an oops, dropped something, and practically dove to the floor, ignoring the startled exclamation of his teacher. Please, come with me right now. Come on, he whispered, holding his hand out to the little girl. She looked at him with teary eyes, and he gave the teacher an awkward smile from his place on the ground. Almost got it, sir. Be gone in a minute. He grimaced in an attempt to grin reassuringly, finally feeling the girl grab his hand. Ha! Got it! Bye, Professor! And he pulled her out of the room as quickly as possible. Clearly, this was going to be a problem for his focus, so he decided to just skip out on the rest of classes for today. The little girl was still sulking when they got back to his apartment. He practically had to drag her up the stairs because she was going at about a snail's pace on her own. I remember your name, he said a while later, offering a cookie to the girl that was now sulking on his bed. Hopefully she would be able to eat it. It hadn't occurred to him that she might not be able to until she was already reaching for it. You do? You really do? What is it then, Sparkle? She demanded, having snatched the cookie with no problem. It's Annalise, right? He said slowly. Honestly, not sure. He'd texted his mother in the middle of math, asking what he'd called his childhood imaginary friend, and that was the suggestion she'd settled on just a few minutes before. Hopefully it was right. Xander didn't think he could deal with another fit like she had thrown earlier. By the large grin that split her face, the way she shoved the whole cookie in her mouth, and then, with her newly free hands, gave him the biggest hug she could muster, he supposed it was correct. Yay! You remembered me, Sparkle! You remembered! Now we can play! Xander fought the urge to fall over in exasperation, but also to smile at the adorable person before him. He was still 90% sure he was having a mental breakdown, but he supposed that if that was the case, that there were worse things that could be haunting him than his adorable childhood imaginary friend. 3 days later, Xander returned to the apartment feeling more refreshed than ever. The girl was cute, but she was a real handful. This was the first day he'd managed to convince her not to follow him to all of his classes, which made his life about 50 times less stressful. By now, he was pretty sure all of his teachers and most of his friends thought he was totally insane, and honestly, he wasn't far behind them. But having one normal day was doing wonders for his confidence in his own faculties. Opening the door to his room, however, made all of that fly out the window, just as the blood rushed from his face. "Sparkle! Sparkle, look at what I did!" Annalise squealed, clearly excited to show him the renovations she had done to his room. "I can see," he nearly wheezed, feeling a bit faint. "Pink. Dag nabbit, everything was pink and sparkly, and he had one of those weird drapey princess things over his bed. What on earth?" He stopped short as he whipped around to see her. She looked so darn proud of herself. "Do you like it, Sparkle? I thought you would," she chirped, leading him over to his desk to show him that his paper was now all princess-themed and his pencils smelled like cherries. "Cherries are your favorite still, right?" Oh, geez, he couldn't possibly... He looked around the room and his shoulders slumped. It wasn't so terrible. The pinks were mostly light or hot, nothing super bright. The covers looked soft, and she was smiling so brightly. Honestly, since Annalise was invisible to everyone else, everything she did to his room probably was as well. Plus, he did love cherries. It was 3 weeks after Annalise came back, and Xander was proud of how well he was dealing with the apparent mental break he'd suffered. Everyone was still looking at him strangely sometimes, especially the teacher whose chair he'd taken a journey under, and if he stayed out too late, she would come find him and try to play, but it was all turning a bit more normal. For the first time since she appeared, Xander was having some friends over, because he felt like he was now able to juggle ignoring Annalise and paying attention enough that she wouldn't throw a fit again. It was going really well. Annalise was very distracted by the movie playing, which allowed Xander and his friends to chat amongst themselves and play a mean game of Uno. Oh man, guys, I need to show you guys something. It's in my room. Xander cut excitedly through the conversation, leaping up and leading the charge to his domain. The door swung open easy as always, and Xander didn't even notice his friends stop in shock as he continued in, without pause. Hey, Xan, what the heck?" Michael asked. Xander turned to look at him uncomprehendingly. "What the heck about what?" he asked. "Bro. Pink?" And suddenly, Xander remembered that his room had been redecorated. It had been weeks since then. He'd thought no one would be able to see it anyway, and he had acclimated to it, so he hadn't even thought... "Oh gosh," he groaned, flopping face first onto the silky smooth covers that he'd been enjoying for the last week and a half. His life was over.
What's up, inmates? This is Paishi. I have a bit of a judge comment real quick. So I just reread both of these Scorches, both Crickets, which will be on the Patreon, and Bones that won. And I think I know why I picked them. They're both why I picked Bones. They're both very well written, but I think I was looking for a little more of a fantasy element. Remember I said I read a fan fiction that was pretty much, I summarized as the prompt. In that fic, again I don't remember the fandom, or I would look it up and try to link it, the imaginary friend turned out to be some kind of demon and showed up, and there was some kind of romantic element. Anyway, the imaginary friend actually had a fantasy element to it. And in Bones of Scorch, that is true that the imaginary friend also had, a fantasy element, a reason for being called imaginary. Whereas in Crickets, that's not so much the case. Although Crickets is very fun. Anyway, I also loved the little fairy tale joke in Bones of Scorch, so if you see that, that's fun too. Keep those fires burning, y'all.
Alright, so that's the end of the Scorch. This was a really fun Scorch to come back to, largely because I have Scorches that I think about like all the time, even if they're standalone, and I have ones that I kind of forgot I even wrote. And this actually is one of the ones that I didn't even remember anything about. I don't think about Annalise or the world I made in which imaginary friends could do this. I don't have any answers as to what she actually is or what triggered her showing up or anything. Honestly, the only thing I remembered before rereading this Scorch was that the secondhand embarrassment I wrote was horrifying. And that was part of the reason I never went back and read it. But upon reread, I'm quite pleased with what I did here. I think it's funny, and I hope you do as well. And as for like imaginary friends and stuff, I don't think I ever had one. I don't remember having one. I don't actually think I know anyone that has had one. I don't know. But I think it would be fun if in the comments, if you had an imaginary friend, go ahead and tell us. Tell us about your imaginary friend. I think that could be cool. All right, cool, that's it. So moving on to the prompt. The prompt I gave for next week, for week 8, was an opportunity well lost, which is also the title of a short story I wrote for the Maestroverse, much like my last prompt was. So that's a fun one. And I like this prompt because it presents the idea of like kind of an oxymoron where you have to write an opportunity and explain why it's actually a good thing that it was passed up. So I was interested to see what people would come up with, and it was fun. So see you guys in the next episode, and keep that fire burning. The Cellblock Scorch is a production of Stellacore, an independent group of nerds sharing their obsessions with the world. We can be reached at thestellacore@gmail.com through comments on your podcast platform of choice, our Instagram, Stella_core, and at our YouTube, also called Stellacore. Feel free to check out our other productions on our YouTube channel, our cosplays on Instagram, or if you would like to support our creative endeavors, check out our Patreon or donate to the Ko-Fi of the writer of your favorite Scorches.